They were with someone else, but their mind kept circling back to you, and that changes everything. Listen carefully, because this is not about a simple return, and it is not about drama. It is about a truth they tried to bury and could not bury for long. They may have smiled somewhere else, talked to someone else, even tried to build a different life on the surface, but deep inside, something never fully released you. That unfinished feeling stayed alive in quiet moments, in late nights, in the spaces where no distraction could protect them from what was real. And now, the message inside them feels urgent, not because time suddenly became kind, but because denial finally became too heavy to carry. If you have ever felt that some bonds do not end just because people walk away, stay with me, because the next part matters. This is for the one who kept wondering if the connection was real, if the silence meant nothing, if being left behind meant being forgotten. It did not. What happened was not a clean ending. It was a delayed truth. They chose what felt easier, what looked safer, what asked less from them. But what is easy does not always bring peace, and what looks stable is not always what speaks to the soul. That is where their conflict began. While life kept moving on outside, something inside them remained tied to what they never fully faced with you, and now that truth is no longer quiet. They did not move toward another person because you lacked value. They moved because real connection asks for courage, and courage was the one thing they did not know how to hold at that time. What you offered was not light, casual, or easy to control. It asked for honesty. It asked for emotional presence. It asked them to be seen without masks, without escape routes, without the comfort of pretending they felt less than they actually felt. That kind of closeness can wake people up, but it can also scare them. So instead of stepping deeper into something meaningful, they turned toward what felt more manageable. They picked familiarity over truth. They picked predictability over transformation. They picked a place where they could stay half awake inside their own emotions and still call it a life. But here is what they did not understand then. You can leave a person physically and still remain emotionally tied to what was real between you. Real connection does not vanish just because someone becomes confused. It does not disappear because fear got louder than love. It stays, quietly, patiently, deep in the background. And over time, that quiet presence becomes impossible to ignore. If this is touching something deep in you, keep listening. Because what comes next explains why their silence never told the full story. Their distance looked final on the outside, but inside them, it was never as settled as it seemed. At first, they probably told themselves they had done the right thing. People do that when they are trying to protect their decisions from their own conscience. They create explanations. They call comfort peace. They call avoidance maturity. They tell themselves that if life is smoother, then it must be better. But the heart does not stay silent forever when something true has been left behind. In quiet evenings, in ordinary mornings, in moments when the noise of life faded down, they started feeling the difference between what was convenient and what was meaningful, and that difference slowly began to trouble them. The connection they chose may have looked fine from the outside, but it did not carry the same depth. It did not shake them awake. It did not challenge them to grow. It did not reach the hidden places in them that your presence touched without even trying. So even while they stayed where things felt controlled, a quiet dissatisfaction began to build. Not dramatic, not loud, just steady, the kind that sits in the chest and keeps whispering, something is missing, something important was left unfinished. They could distract themselves for a while. They could stay busy. They could smile, talk, go through routines, and keep life moving. But the truth has a way of waiting until a person becomes still. Then it rises. Then it speaks. Then it asks the question they tried so hard not to answer. Why did what they had elsewhere never feel as alive as what they walked away from with you? The answer did not come all at once. It came slowly, and that made it harder to escape. It showed up in comparison. In memories they did not invite back, but could not stop. In the strange way your energy remained present even when they were trying to invest themselves somewhere else. They began to notice that no matter how much they pushed forward, part of them was always looking over its shoulder emotionally. Not because they wanted chaos, not because they were trying to play games, but because the bond with you was never fully understood, and what is not understood often lingers with the most force. They started seeing how much of themselves they had hidden just to keep life simple. They avoided the deeper questions. They avoided the risk of being vulnerable. They avoided the possibility that loving something real might demand a version of them they had not yet become. And once a person begins to see their own pattern, they cannot fully unsee it. That is where the shift began. They realized the issue was never your worth. It was their readiness. It was their fear of what your connection required from them. This is important, so hear it clearly. Their inconsistency was not proof that you meant little. In many cases, inconsistency is what happens when someone feels more than they know how to handle. They pull close, then step back. They feel drawn in, then overwhelmed. They want the truth, then run from the truth. And that push and pull creates confusion for the person who loved honestly. Maybe that was you. Maybe you were the one standing there asking for clarity while they kept living in hesitation. But now they are beginning to understand the cost of that hesitation. At some point they stopped pretending to themselves. Not publicly, not in some dramatic confession. Internally, quietly, honestly. They admitted that what they were living did not fully match what they felt. They admitted that the place they chose was easier, but not deeper. They admitted that even if they kept moving through daily life, a part of them remained emotionally unfinished with you. That kind of realization does not feel romantic at first. It feels uncomfortable, it brings regret, it shines light on choices that can no longer be softened by excuses. Because once they understood that they never truly gave your connection a fair chance, they also had to face why. And why was not flattering. It was fear. Fear of closeness, fear of losing control, fear of being changed by love, fear of standing in front of someone who saw them too clearly. That kind of fear can make a person choose a smaller life because a bigger truth feels dangerous. So yes, they stepped away. Yes, they stayed where less was required. Yes, they avoided the deeper road. But now they can see that what they were avoiding was not really you. It was the mirror your presence held up to them. You reflected back the parts of them that needed honesty, healing, and courage. And instead of meeting that moment fully, they turned away from it. Stay with me here, because this is where everything becomes clear. They were not escaping your value. They were escaping the emotional work your connection demanded from them. Now the weight of that understanding sits differently in them. It is no longer just a passing thought or an old memory that appears and disappears. It has become a steady awareness. They can now see the effect their silence had, the effect their mixed signals had, the effect of making someone who was sincere carry confusion that never belonged to them. And that awareness does not leave easily. It follows them into stillness. It returns in reflective moments. It grows stronger whenever life presents another connection that feels safe but shallow. Because once you have touched something real, everything less begins to reveal itself. That is part of why this message feels urgent inside them now. Not because they expect to reverse time, not because they assume they can come back and be welcomed, but because truth, once fully seen, creates pressure. A person either speaks it or carries it like a stone inside the chest. They are beginning to understand that they cannot keep telling themselves the old story. They cannot keep saying you were just a phase, just timing, just emotion, just one more person they once knew. No. The connection marked them. It taught them something. It exposed something. It remained with them long after they tried to place their attention somewhere else. And the deeper message beneath all of this is not only about them, it is about you too, because you need to know that what happened was never proof that you were not enough. It was proof that someone who met something genuine was not yet mature enough to carry it with both hands. You were not replaced by someone better. You crossed paths with someone who did not yet have the emotional capacity to meet you in the way you deserved. That is a very different truth. One truth wounds your self-worth. The other protects it. They may have chosen another path, but that choice came from their limits, not your lack. And when that becomes clear, your whole story changes. Their leaving was not a final judgment on your value. It was a reflection of their own inner conflict. Their fear made decisions they later had to live with. Their hesitation created distance they later had to understand. Their avoidance became a lesson they could not skip forever. And now, as they begin to carry the full weight of what they delayed and left unresolved, you stand in a different place too. Stronger, wiser, less willing to confuse breadcrumbs with effort, less willing to call mixed energy love, more able to see that being deeply felt by someone means very little if they never rise to meet that feeling with truth. That part matters. Do not miss it, because while they are learning what they lost through avoidance, you are learning what you will no longer accept through growth. And that is powerful. It means this is no longer only their awakening. It is also your elevation. You are no longer standing in the same emotional place where the confusion first found you. You are learning to trust your instincts, to respect your standards, and to stop measuring your worth through another person's fear. That shift changes everything, because any future moment between you will now be met by a stronger version of you. What they want you to understand most is that this is not just about missing comfort, routine, or familiarity. It goes deeper than that. People can miss comfort anywhere. But what unsettles them now is the realization that what existed with you carried emotional truth. It had depth. It had weight. It had the kind of presence that does not disappear just because someone walks in another direction. In every choice they made afterward, there was still a quiet awareness of you. Maybe not every hour, maybe not every day, but enough to remain, enough to compare. Enough to make ordinary moments feel thinner than before. Enough to make them wonder why what looked right on paper never felt fully right in the soul. This is where regret begins to mature, not as a burst of sadness, but as a long understanding. A person starts seeing not only what they lost, but what they refused to honor when it was in front of them. They begin to understand that real connection is rare, and fear is expensive. It costs timing. It costs trust. It costs people who would have loved them honestly if only they had been brave enough to stay open. If this part speaks to your experience, stay until the end because the deeper truth is still unfolding. What they carry now is not a dramatic performance. It is quieter than that. It is a sober clarity, a recognition that they misread something meaningful because they were still ruled by emotional survival instead of emotional honesty. And clarity changes a person, even when nothing external happens right away. They may never speak every detail out loud. They may not know how to form the perfect message. They may still feel shame about how long it took them to understand their own heart. But internally, something has already shifted. They are no longer hiding from the truth with the same ease. They are no longer fully asleep inside the story they once told themselves. The illusion has cracked. They can now see that being physically present with someone else did not erase what remained emotionally connected to you. And that realization forces humility. It forces accountability. It forces them to sit with the fact that someone genuine once stood before them, asked for honesty, and was met with delay, silence, or half-effort. That is not a small thing to understand. It changes how they see their past. It changes how they see love. It changes how they see themselves. But hear this clearly too. Their awakening does not automatically mean your door must open again. Their clarity does not create an obligation for you. Their regret does not erase the confusion you carried. This message is not asking you to go backward. It is asking you to see the truth more clearly. They know now that you deserved full presence, not partial attention. You deserved consistency, not emotional guessing games. You deserved someone who did not need to lose the real thing before understanding its value. That awareness is heavy for them, and it should be. Because growth is not only beautiful. Sometimes growth arrives as grief for the version of ourselves that acted from fear and wounded what mattered. Late at night, in quiet pauses, in the strange stillness that comes when a person can no longer distract themselves, this is where their understanding deepens. They think about the moments they held back, the times they knew more than they admitted, the conversations they avoided, the honesty they postponed, the energy they felt but tried to label as something smaller. And with every layer of reflection, the truth becomes harder to reduce. You were not an option they simply passed by. You were a meaningful connection they were not ready to honor. That is why the memory remains active. That is why the emotional imprint lasted. That is why, even after moving elsewhere, part of them kept returning inwardly to what was unfinished. Human attachment is not always logical. People can act against their own deeper truth for long periods of time. They can confuse distraction with healing. They can confuse new attention with inner peace. They can even build temporary lives around choices made from fear. But the soul keeps records. The heart keeps contrast. And eventually, the difference between what was real and what was merely convenient becomes impossible to ignore. This is not about fantasy. It is about emotional reality. A person can move on outwardly and still remain tied inwardly to the place where truth once asked them to be brave. That is where they have been living for longer than they admit. And now, whether they speak or stay silent, they know it. They know the person they hesitated with was not random. It was you. And that recognition has become part of who they are now. At the same time, your journey has not been standing still. While they were learning through regret, you were learning through strength. While they were facing the meaning of what they avoided, you were slowly building boundaries. While they were waking up to their fear, you were waking up to your own value. That matters more than you think, because growth on your side protects you from repeating old patterns out of loneliness, nostalgia, or hope. You are no longer the same person who once waited in confusion and tried to decode silence. You are becoming someone more grounded, someone who understands that real love does not ask you to abandon your self-respect just to keep a bond alive. You are learning that clarity is attractive, peace is precious, and being chosen fully matters. So if life ever places this person in front of you again, the energy will not be the same as before, not because the connection lacked meaning, but because you have changed. Your standards have changed. Your emotional posture has changed. You now know that chemistry without courage creates pain. Depth without honesty creates instability. Feeling deeply is not enough if action never rises to meet it. This is the wisdom your path has given you, and that is why any future interaction, if it happens at all, must come from conscious choice, not old longing. Not from wounds reopening. Not from the need to prove that the past meant something. The past already meant something. The question now is whether the present can meet the truth that the past revealed. That is a different question. That is a stronger question. And now you are finally strong enough to ask it. There is also something else you need to see. Sometimes when a person returns emotionally, it is not because they suddenly became perfect. It is because reality finally caught up with them. They can no longer live comfortably inside the old version of the story. They now understand that the connection they stepped away from had more truth than the one they stepped into. They see that you were asking for something healthy while they were still committed to emotional shortcuts. They see that your openness was not pressure, it was maturity. Your desire for honesty was not too much. It was exactly what real connection requires. And this is where respect begins to rise in them alongside regret. They respect the fact that you did not settle for blurred effort. They respect the fact that you felt deeply and still tried to stay truthful. They respect the way you held your heart with more courage than they held theirs. That kind of respect lasts because it is tied to truth. It is not built on fantasy. It is built on the memory of how you showed up while they were still divided inside themselves. Listen closely, because this next part matters. Not every realization leads to action, but every real realization leaves a mark. Even if they never fully express all of this, the awareness will follow them. It will shape their future choices. It will reshape how they respond the next time life offers them something genuine. And somewhere in that change is your impact. You became the lesson they could not erase. You became the contrast that revealed the difference between comfort and truth. You became the memory that kept proving depth cannot be replaced by convenience. So what does all of this really mean for you now? It means you can stop carrying blame that was never yours. It means you can release the old question of whether you were enough. You were enough. In fact, you may have been too real for someone who was still trying to survive through emotional distance. It means you no longer need their confusion to define your worth. Their delay was about their own process. Their awakening belongs to them. Your job is not to rescue them from the consequences of their fear. Your job is to remain rooted in what you now know. You know what half-effort feels like. You know what mixed energy costs. You know how deeply silence can wound when truth is avoided. And because you know all of that now, you also know what you deserve with greater clarity than before. You deserve someone whose actions do not have to catch up years later to what their heart already knew. You deserve someone who does not choose safety over sincerity when things become emotionally real. You deserve someone who can stay, speak, and show up when vulnerability enters the room. That is the standard. That is the lesson. And whether this person ever reaches out or not, the deeper truth remains the same. Their story with you did not end in indifference. It ended in delay. It ended in fear. It ended in a lesson that kept unfolding long after the visible chapter closed. But your story does not end there. Yours continues into stronger ground, cleaner vision, and a deeper refusal to shrink your needs just to be easier to keep. In the end, this is not only a story about someone realizing your worth after choosing another path. It is a story about emotional truth becoming impossible to avoid. It is about fear losing its grip one honest moment at a time. It is about the difference between being physically present somewhere and being emotionally alive there. It is about what happens when a person finally understands that the one they could not fully show up for was the one who was actually real. And it is also about you stepping out of confusion and into self-respect so fully that any next step, whatever it is, comes from clarity instead of ache. Let that settle in. You do not need to rush. You do not need to force meaning. You do not need to chase confirmation from someone who once struggled to face themselves. What is real will reveal itself through effort, truth, and consistency. What cannot meet you there will fall away on its own, so stay grounded. Trust what your instincts have been trying to tell you. Let your peace become more important than old uncertainty. Let your standards become stronger than old hope. And if this message found you at the exact moment you needed clarity, hold on to the deepest truth inside it. You were never hard to love. You were simply encountered by someone who had not yet learned how to love without fear. Now they know. Now you know. And from this point forward, the power is no longer in what they failed to do back then. The power is in what you choose, what you allow, and what you refuse to settle for from here on.